you need your Hurley.
Yeah.
You need your John Locke. You need a bunch of those personalities.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Comicbook.com. I am Logan Moore, and joining me today is Michael Emerson. Michael, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Hello, thanks for having me, Logan.
Of course. Michael, you have been in Fallout recently. This is the biggest project that you have been in lately. This is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today. We talked before we started rolling here, and you said that you didn't have a whole lot of familiarity with the IP and the franchise before you joined that project. I'm curious now, in the wake of the show releasing, though, have you been shocked to see how big it's become, and is it almost been a bigger thing than maybe you even realized that you were getting involved with?
Well, I figured, given the pedigree of the project, I knew that the game was hugely popular and global in reach. And I thought, well, if Jonah Nolan has devoted himself to this thing, then there's something big in it. And once I got on the sets and locations for it, I thought, holy cow, this it's massive. I mean, the vault sets out at Steiner Studios, they were epic. It you just stood there and looked at it and you thought, wow, they built this. This is a make-believe world down here. So I thought, oh, okay, we're into something big here. But in a way, I can't really absorb the scale or reach of a project because you don't want to start predicting for yourself like, oh, this is going to be big or this is going to find an audience, and all of that because many times you're in something that you think is going to be great and then for whatever reason it doesn't fly.
That's
But
actually something.
apparently this is flying.
Yeah, that's actually something I was going to ask you about later is that the show, obviously, you're one of the first people we've talked to tied to Fallout since the show has been picked up for a season two. I'm
Right.
curious. Obviously, I know Jonathan Nolan and a lot of the other people involved with running the show had talked pretty vocally that they wanted to do multiple seasons before season one ever even came out. Was that something that was talked about on set a lot? Like, okay, we're going to set this up here, but long term, we hope to get to this point, or was it really just trying to focus in the moment on the story of season one and trying not to look too far down the road with the cast and crew there?
Well, they were scripted for. I mean, I believe they were scripted for 8 episodes,
Hmm.
and that was the plan. But along the way, I think they got they got kind of the load was intense in the early going. First, second, third episodes, and I think the things they thought they could shoot more quickly and more simply grew into whole subplots on their own. So the thing was growing, always getting bigger, more difficult, more expensive, more challenging technically. All of that. The post production on this thing must have been staggering.
Yeah,
You
yeah, that's the one thing I've seen everybody saying so much is that the production value is like off the charts in every single way. Like you talked about the sets and stuff like that. Like that was my big takeaway after watching the series as well. That they just
and I
really nailed
think
out that stuff.
now that I've watched the episodes, I think getting the tone right was
Hmm.
a huge challenge. And from what I hear, not being a player of the game myself, it sounds like they did a pretty good job of
Yeah.
merging what was comical or antic with that kind of retro, futuristic, post-apocalyptic, Western
Hmm.
kind of sensibility. It's kind of all in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been playing those games since for far longer than I probably should have when I was a kid. And yes, they definitely nailed the tone. I wanted to ask you about your character, Wilzik, because he's kind of mired in a lot of mystery. We don't know his whole backstory. We don't know all the further details of what his motives are and what he was looking to do in this world. Did you have to kind of fill in those gaps for yourself as an actor when reading the scripts, or did the writers and producers kind of help fill in those gaps for you? Or was it even a situation where you didn't feel like you needed to know everything about the character?
See, this is the kind of role where they come to me because I don't need any backstory. I don't really spend a lot of time trying to think, well, what did he have for lunch, or what was his childhood like, or how did he become the moral or amoral personality that he is presently? I'm a little more like, what's on the page for today's work, and you know, what's an interesting way to play it. I'm not trying to play things like me. I never play a character that really is anything like me myself.
Hmm.
I'm just, I'm really, it is just like make believe. On some level, it's that childish. I have these words to say. Well, what's an interesting way to say it? I mean, I have my little bag of actor tricks. I have this particular voice that I have, and I'm really concerned with, partly because I grew up in the theater. I'm real concerned with the language, how it's spoken, and the music of the voice. So to
Hmm.
me, sometimes I'm not even thinking literally about the words as signifiers of thought. I'm thinking of them as musical notes. And how do they sound best coming out of my mouth?
That's
So,
a that's a really interesting approach. I've heard other actors say things along those lines, but I don't think I've ever heard it put in that exact way, describing it as sort of music.
and
So
I'm so fortunate that I get, well, I'm always following good writing, and that's what I'm looking for. And then I get to work with someone like Jonah Nolan, who writes me like world class monologues, like that scene by the campfire
mhm.
when I'm telling Lucy about the evolution of cockroaches and her likely chances of survival on the surface. That was dark, but beautifully written.
Yeah.
And
I,
so then I just, you just kind of get out of the way of a good speech like that. Try not to do too much with it because it's gorgeous enough as it is.
yeah. Um, I mentioned season two is happening. Obviously, your character meets a grim demise very early in season one. This is a show, though, that is ripe with flashbacks, obviously. And I feel like there's a lot. I mean, your character stems from the faction, the Enclave, which is never really explored much at all in season one. I imagine that's something they're going to explore way more in the future.
Hmm.
Basically, to me, I feel like the door is open for your character to return in some flashbacks and stuff like that. Is that something you would like? Is that something you would absolutely be open to if that opportunity presented itself?
I mean, yeah, that might be interesting. It's always a comforting thought to think that something you've already done could have another chapter, another life. But until then, until then, there's always my head.
There is always your head, even
Is
though I
the
think
head? I mean, maybe the head will win an award. Best recurring body part in a limited series.
I think they may have tossed it aside there in the final episode, but it's still somewhere. It's still somewhere sitting around there. Um, I mean, personally, I'd love to see you show back up in a season two, and I would cross my fingers and hope that would happen. I feel like you've served as a great window into Wilzig's sort of corner of the Fallout universe, and I think that would make sense to come back to him and kind of
Yeah,
dive back into
I
that a little
mean,
bit further.
it's possible too that he left voice recordings of himself that
True.
could somehow appear in some interesting electronic way, or something like that.
It's
As
very
you said,
Fallout-esque. Yes.
I mean, because I hearken back to the last project I did with Jonah Nolan, which was Person of
Yeah.
Interest, in which some characters were absorbed into a computer program
Yeah.
and became immortal.
I had a couple more questions for you. I have
Please.
to know the funniest thing about the entire series to me is Wilzig and his pet dog there running away from the turret that somehow misses every single shot fired out of that turret. What was I mean, I assume a lot of that was like CGI and done in post, but what was that whole sequence like? And was it I just thought it was funny. Like it's one of those instances where, like you said, it kind of aligns the comedy with, like, I don't think it's trying to be overtly comical, but it is when you watch it to some degree. Uh,
The net result was
yes.
comical. I thought so too, because we look. it's true what they say, working with kids and dogs. It's tough. It's tough to get even a highly trained dog to go on action and
Mhm.
to sort of stay with you, keep the pace together so it looks like something. And then there were squibs going off, but nothing like you saw in the
Yeah.
final cut. That was like, oh my God, it was like a hail of bullets and stuff exploding all around. And as you say, we didn't get a scratch on us.
Every single shot missed. I told my fiance who I watched it with, I was like, that thing was firing worse than stormtroopers in Star Wars. Like that was horrible. So
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about that one.
I did actually want to ask about the dog. Did you work with only a single dog on the series? Was it multiples? I know they kind of do different things from time to time. And what was a lot of actors who've worked with animals in the past have talked about like developing a really quick bond with them while working with them. Is that something that happened in your experience this time around? What was that like?
Yeah, everything I do for Jonah Nolan, I have a dog. More specifically, I have a Belgian Malinois. That's the breed. It's always the breed. And when they come to work, in the case of Fallout, there was a team of 4 dogs, like a family. They're related, they're cousins or siblings. There's usually one who's going to be your key dog that gets most of the close up coverage, facial expressions, stuff like that. Then, in the case of Fallout, they needed a dog that could do the athletic stuff, like jumping through windows or taking down the ghoul. Those kinds of things. So there were specialties, and sometimes the dogs come and go. Sometimes the dog has a bad day and you can't really even use them. They're too distracted or unhappy or something. So I suppose they ended up using maybe 8 or 10 dogs
Interesting.
in the course of shooting.
That's fascinating. Huh. Okay, Michael, last question for you. I have you here. I got to ask you about Lost very quickly. We're in this sort of era of like legacy sequels and reboots. Like this is happening left and right with TV and film. We're coming up on Lost. It's been nearly like 15 years since the show ended. I
Yeah.
guess for you, do you see anybody ever trying to come back and reboot this or do a legacy sequel in some sort of way? And do you think that would even be a good idea with how the show ended? Should it just be left alone? Like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm at peace with the ending of the series. I suppose, like any other intellectual property, it could be developed. Someone could spin it off or do a pre-Lost or a post-Lost or some sidebar universe or something like that. It would have to be a whole new idea
Yeah.
and a whole new set of writers. I can't imagine that the writers of the original Lost could be lured back to tackle it again. And certainly you would never get, I don't know what actors you would get, but very few from that show.
Mhm.
But it could be something. And I was going to say, who would feel up to the challenge of taking on a show that turned people's heads in such a big way? It would be daunting. It would be daunting at the studio level to say, wow, this is this would be biting off a lot. But never say never.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing, in my opinion, real quick before we close, like that show is so character focused. I feel like it's less about the universe and more about the characters. And so I think if you, like you said, try to do a spinoff with different characters or something else, it might not hit the same way. But
Yeah,
who knows? Maybe somebody's got a really great idea out there.
you would need. I mean, you need your Hurley. You
Yeah.
you need your John Locke. You need a bunch of those personalities.
Hmm. I completely agree with
Oh,
you.
I don't know. It'd be cool.
I'm
Like,
sure somebody will give it a go at some point. I would not on a long enough timeline. I'm sure it'll happen.
yeah.
So, Michael, thank you so much for talking to me today. It was great to speak with you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. And for everything else related to comicbook.com and movies, TV shows, whatever else we got going on, be sure to check out everything else here on our YouTube channel.